The last Thursday people always talk too loudly at a funeral. Maybe they don't mean to, but grief makes you deaf to your own voice. My living room, the same room where Evelyn and I watched the evening news for 40 years, hummed with voices and the clink of cups on saucers. Someone had opened the windows and the smell of coffee in store, bought biscuits mixed with the faint scent of the lilies from the church. She never missed a Thursday at the bank, such a responsible woman. Mrs. Dawson from across the street was saying. Every week, rain or shine. I used to joke she worked there more than the staff. I heard her. Even from the armchair in the corner where I'd retreated. I'd heard that line in one form or another all morning, so organized, so disciplined, always off to the bank on Thursdays. As if that one habit summed up my wife. For 40 years, every Thursday around 9, Evelyn would pick up her old brown handbag, slip on her sensible shoes, and say the same thing. I'm going to the bank, Frank. I'll be back by lunch. Sometimes she'd add, don't forget to eat. Like I was one of our kids again instead of a man in his 70s. I never asked questions. I'm a mechanic by trade, or I was until my knees started complaining louder than the engines. I handled carburetors and crankshafts, she handled numbers and forms. It was an arrangement that suited us both. Or at least I'd always thought so. Now she was lying in the ground, and my house, our house, was full of people telling me things they thought I didn't know. Your Evelyn kept you two afloat. Someone chuckled near the kitchen. All those Thursdays paying bills, keeping everything straight. A good woman. I stared at the framed photo on the mantel. Evelyn in her 40s. Hair still mostly brown, laughing at something I couldn't remember. I let my fingers rest on the arm of the chair to stop their slight tremor. I let her handle the money. I handled the cars. I murmured when someone offered the same compliment directly to me. It was easier than explaining that I had never once looked at our bank statements, longer than it took to see if the garage payment had cleared. By late afternoon the crowd thinned. People drifted away in twos and threes, leaving behind crumpled napkins and half-full paper plates on every flat surface. Jenny kissed my cheek and promised to call that night when she got the kids settled. Mark left with his wife in a flurry of cigarette smoke and cologne, saying something about needing to get back to the office. Then it was just me and the ticking of the old wall clock. I wandered into the kitchen more out of habit than hunger. The counter was lined with casseroles from neighbors, each one covered in foil with a name scrawled on top. Beside them sat Evelyn's leather handbag, the one she'd carried every Thursday of my adult life. Someone must have brought it back from the church and set it there like another dish. I don't know what made me pick it up. Maybe it was the way the strap had molded to the curve of her shoulder over the years, or the faint smell of her hand cream that still clung to the leather. It felt wrong just leaving it there. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down. The chair creaked under me, familiar and unfriendly all at once. For a long minute I just held the bag, my thumb rubbing the worn spot on the clasp the way hers used to. Then, almost without thinking, I opened it. Inside were the usual things: a packet of tissues, a lipstick worn down to the nub, a small tin of mints, a pen with the bank's logo on it, and under those, folded with careful precision, her passbook. I hadn't seen one of those in years. Most people went online now. Evelyn never trusted screens. Paper doesn't glitch, she'd say. I flipped it open. There it was, line after neat line in that faded dot matrix print. Deposits. Balances, the same branch name at the top of every page. I ran a finger down the entries, my eyes snagging on the dates. Thursdays. Every one. For decades. There were small deposits that made sense to me, amounts that could have been what I paid her from the garage takings. But scattered between them were larger sums I couldn't place. Numbers that dwarfed the thin profits I remembered from certain lean years. Money that hadn't come from my work. A tightness gripped my chest that had nothing to do with the heartburn the doctor kept warning me about. Where did it come from? Why had she never mentioned it? Tucked in the back cover was a small white envelope. My name was written on the front in her looping handwriting, the ink a little shaky at the end where her illness had worn her down. Under my name were the words, "For your eyes only, if I'm gone, do not show anyone." My fingers went numb. For a moment I just stared at it, the way you stare at a ticking engine trying to decide if you really heard what you think you heard. Then I slipped it back into the bag and closed it. I was too tired, too raw to peel back one more layer of surprise that day. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink and sat there until the streetlights blinked on outside. By then I'd made up my mind about one thing, at least. Tomorrow I'd go to the bank. One last Thursday, even if it was a Friday. Morning came whether I wanted it to or not. I put on my only good suit, the one Evelyn always said made me look like a retired undertaker, and drove to the branch on Maple Street. It looked the same as it always had when I dropped her off out front all those years. Brick facade, shiny glass doors, potted plants that somehow never died. Inside, the air smelled like printer toner and lemon polish. A young woman behind the counter greeted me with the professional brightness they must teach in training. When I gave her Evelyn's name and death certificate, her smile flickered. "Oh," she said softly. "Mrs. Harris." She glanced at her computer screen, then back at me with a new kind of respect. "One moment, sir. I'll get Mr. Cole." The branch manager knew my wife on sight, it turned out. Tall, neatly dressed, the kind of man who looked like he'd been born wearing a tie, he ushered me into his office with the gravity of a priest. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Harris," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "Your wife was quite an exceptional woman. We all thought very highly of her here." I nodded, unsure what else to do. He opened a thick file, the tab marked with her name. Papers shifted, pages turned. Then he slid a form toward me and asked for my ID. My driver's license felt flimsy against the polished wood. Once he'd finished his checks, he turned the computer monitor slightly in my direction. "I don't know if you're aware," he said carefully, "that Mrs. Harris has been maintaining a private arrangement here for about 40 years. "A private arrangement," I repeated. The words sounded foreign. He clicked something. Numbers filled the screen. A separate account, and later a trust and safety deposit box, all in her name. "You're listed here as a contingent beneficiary. There are also other names and instructions." As he scrolled, the columns of figures and legal terms blurred. But one thing cut through clear as icy: the total. What he showed me on that screen made my blood run cold. In 40 years of marriage, I thought I knew my wife. In that moment, I realized there was a part of her life I'd never even touched. 40 years of Thursdays. Looking at those numbers on Mr. Cole's screen dragged me backward through time whether I wanted it or not. You don't get to 40 years of Thursdays without a beginning. And ours started with a Tuesday afternoon and a broken alternator. I was 24, skinny as a rail and covered in grease most days, trying to get my own little garage off the ground. Her car limped into the bay sputtering like a man on his last cigarette. She got out wearing a navy skirt and a white blouse, her hair pinned up in that no-nonsense way bank girls wore it back then. I remember thinking she looked like she'd stepped out of a brochure for sensible savings. "Is it bad?" she asked, nodding toward the car. "Depends how attached you are," I said. "To me, not the car. I could use the work." As she laughed, a quick, bright sound. While I checked the engine, she stood nearby asking questions about the business. Turned out she was a teller down at Maple Street Bank. I made some crack about hating paperwork and numbers. "You fix the cars, I'll fix the numbers," she said, just like that, like it was the most obvious division of labor in the world. It took me 3 days to work up the nerve to ask her out, and another 3 before she said yes. We married a year later in a little church with peeling paint and flowers her sisters arranged themselves. We didn't have much, my half-paid-off garage, her modest salary, but we had enough for a down payment on a small house at the edge of town. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a kitchen with yellow linoleum that always looked like it needed scrubbing even when it didn't. From the start, Evelyn was the one who made sure the lights stayed on. Payday Fridays. I'd hand her an envelope with whatever was left after parts and wages, and she'd sit at the table with a notepad and that furrow between her brows. Rent, electricity, groceries. She'd mutter, pencil tapping. "You fix the cars, I'll fix the numbers, remember?" I was too tired most nights to argue. The Thursday thing started small. She'd come home from the bank with a different energy, all businesslike and focused. "Got to nip back in tomorrow, straighten a few things out with our account," she said one evening, shrugging off her coat. "It'll be easier if I do it on my lunch break. I'll go on Thursdays." And so it became a rhythm. Thursday mornings, she'd put on a neat blouse, not her teller uniform, something of her own, and pick up that leather handbag. She'd smooth my hair back like I was the one heading off to something important. "I'm going to the bank, Frank. Don't forget to eat," she'd say, every time. I'd kiss her forehead and grunt something like, "Yeah, yeah," before heading out to coax another coughing engine back to life. I never once asked exactly what she did there beyond pay bills and move money around. Kids came along eventually. Mark first, full of noise and questions and restless feet. Then Jenny, quieter but with eyes that missed nothing. Money got tighter with every new pair of shoes. I took on extra jobs evenings and weekends. Sometimes I'd go days barely seeing the kids awake. Through it all, Evelyn kept those Thursdays. Even when the baby had colic, even when the car needed repairs of its own, even when the bank brought in new automatic systems she didn't trust. "Paper doesn't glitch," she'd say, tucking passbooks into her bag. "Somebody's got to keep us from sinking." We scraped by. Some years the garage did well, other years it was all I could do to make payroll. Once, during a bad winter when no one wanted to spend money on anything that wasn't directly keeping them warm, I came home to find Evelyn white-faced at the kitchen table, a letter from the bank in her hand. "We're 2 payments behind," she said, "on the house." I remember sitting down so hard the chair squealed. "What do we do?" I asked, feeling for the first time like the ground under our feet might not be as solid as I'd believed. She folded the letter, put it carefully back in the envelope, and set it aside. "You keep the garage running," she said. "I've got it handled." A few weeks later, she came back from the bank on a Thursday with a subtle lightness in her step. "We're caught up," she announced, kissing my cheek. "Don't worry about that one. Just, next time, tell me before it gets that bad, all right?" I never asked exactly how she'd managed it. I told myself she must have shuffled things around, maybe dipped into a savings account I'd half forgotten. There was always so much else to think about. Broken lifts, late deliveries, a kid's broken arm from falling out of a tree. Her magic with the numbers became just another thing I took for granted. Mark grew into a young man with big ideas and not much patience. He tried college for a semester, then bounced through jobs like bad checks, sales, real estate, some import-export opportunity that cost more to join than he ever brought home. "You never invested in me properly," he snapped once at Sunday dinner when Evelyn refused to co-sign yet another loan. "Other parents help their kids get ahead. What kept you fed and clothed and out of jail?" She shot back, sharper than usual. "That's more investment than you know." Later that night, I heard them in the kitchen, voices low but tense. "This is the last time," Evelyn said. "You pay this off and you're done borrowing." "I mean it, Mark." "Where's it coming from?" he demanded. "Dad doesn't make that much." "I just want to make sure we're all right if something happens," she replied. "That includes you, but it doesn't revolve around you." Jenny, for her part, moved 3 hours away after college, found a steady job in accounting, of all things, and built a quiet life of her own. She worried about us in the general way grown daughters do, but she never asked about our money. Maybe she assumed, like I did, that if there was a problem, Evelyn would tell her. Looking back, I see all the little hints Evelyn dropped like breadcrumbs I never bothered to follow. The way she'd stay up late some nights going over papers alone. The extra care she took filing things in the metal cabinet in our bedroom. The occasional, oddly serious question out of nowhere. "Frank, if I go first, you'll go to the bank yourself, right?" she asked me one evening about a year before she died. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun bleed out over the rooftops. "Well, who else would go?" I chuckled. "Mark. He'd try to turn it into a business deal." "Jenny's too far away." She didn't laugh. Her hand found mine squeezed. "Promise me," she insisted. "You won't sign anything without reading it. Even if it's from our own son. And you'll go to the bank yourself. Don't let anyone else take you." At the time I brushed it off as morbid talk, the same way I'd waved away her reminders about wills and insurance. "You worry too much," I told her. "We're fine." Now, sitting in that bank manager's office with a trust I'd never heard of glowing on the screen, her words came back like a wrench to the gut. For 40 years of Thursdays, she'd been walking into this building carrying the weight of our future, in that leather bag. I'd been too busy fixing everyone else's engines to notice she was quietly building a safety net under my feet. Gratitude twisted with guilt in my chest. I thought of every time I'd waved her off with a distracted, "Sure, honey?" and every fight she'd had with Mark while I turned up the television to drown it out. I'd trusted her without question, and now I had to face the fact that trust had let her carry a burden she shouldn't have had to bear alone, and had left me standing in the dark, staring at a life I only half understood. The hidden account I cleared my throat, trying to work some moisture back into my mouth. "I don't understand," I said. "We had a joint account. Our pension, the garage money. Are you saying this is something else?" Mr. Cole laced his fingers together, the way people do when they're about to break news gently. "Yes, sir. Your household accounts are separate. This is an individual relationship Mrs. Harris maintained with the bank. She began it shortly after you opened your garage. Over time, it grew into a high-value account, and later, a trust. High value." I repeated, the words feeling heavy and unreal. I'd spent most of my life counting every dollar twice. "From what?" He turned the monitor a little further toward me. "Regular cash deposits every Thursday," he said. "Many are documented as income from private consulting and bookkeeping services. There are also entries tagged as small inheritances. And then, occasionally, larger deposits with notations I can't discuss in detail without reviewing the trust instrument." "Consulting?" I gave a little humorless laugh. "Evelyn ran PTA bake sales. She wasn't consulting anybody. She was very good with numbers," he said gently. "We have several small businesses on record that listed her as a part-time bookkeeper over the years. It appears she did work on the side. Quietly," he scrolled. "There were also a few one-time sums when relatives passed. A sister, I believe." My chest tightened. "Her older sister, Mary Ann," I said. "She died 15 years ago. Left Evelyn her old jewelry box and some furniture. Or so I thought." Mr. Cole hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to disclose amounts without you signing certain documents," he said, "but I can tell you it was more than furniture. And Mrs. Harris chose to keep those assets in her sole name." I sat back, the chair suddenly hard under my spine. All those Thursdays. All those quiet evenings of her balancing ledgers while I nodded off in front of the television. I felt like I was looking at a stranger's life overlaid on my own. "What about me?" I asked, hearing the smallness in my own voice and hating it. "Where do I fit into all this?" "That's where the trust comes in." He pulled a thin, cream-colored folder from the file and tapped it. "Your wife set this up to activate only upon her death. She was very specific about that. You're listed as a contingent beneficiary and as trustee under certain conditions. There are also other named beneficiaries." "Other who?" I asked. "I'm afraid that's in the trust document itself," he said. "I strongly recommend you review it with an attorney. There is also a safety deposit box in Mrs. Harris's sole name. You are authorized to access it now that we've seen the death certificate, but again, there are notes requesting that you read something first." He opened a desk drawer and produced a smaller envelope, this one with the bank's stamp in the corner. "My name was on the front in Evelyn's handwriting. She gave this to us 10 years ago," he said, "with instructions to release it to you only after her passing. She also left an identical one in her personal effects, I believe." His eyes flicked to the bag on my lap where I'd stuffed her things. "She was very thorough." I took the envelope. It felt heavier than its size justified. "You read it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, sir. That's between you and your wife." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Take some time, Mr. Harris. When you're ready, bring identification and we can arrange for you to view the contents of the safety deposit box. And if you'd like a recommendation for an estate attorney, we have a list." Out in the parking lot, the March wind cut through my suit, but I barely felt it. I sat in the car with the engine off, staring at Evelyn's name on the bank stationery. Private consulting. Trusts, safety deposit boxes, other beneficiaries. How much of my life had I simply not seen? I pulled out my phone and called Jenny first. It rang twice before she answered. "Dad. Everything okay?" Her voice was soft, cautious. "The way you talk to someone you're afraid might break." "I've just been to the bank," I said. "Your mother, there's more than I thought. Accounts. A trust. Apparently she's been doing some kind of bookkeeping work on the side for years. Jenny was quiet for a moment. That sounds like Mom, she said finally. Always planning. Always worrying about rainy days. She never told me, I said. The hurt bled through more than I meant it to. I don't think it was about hiding things from you, Jenny said. She knew you hated talking money. Maybe she thought she was protecting you. She loved you, Dad. You know that? I thought I knew everything? I whispered. None of us ever do. She replied gently. Read whatever she left you. Then call me, okay? Don't let Mark get in your head before you understand it. That last line made my shoulders tense. I haven't told him yet, I said. Good, she answered. A little too fast. At least not until you know what Mom wanted. I hung up feeling both steadied and unsettled. Then, against my better judgment, I dialed Mark. He picked up on the first ring. Hey, Dad. How'd it go? You close everything out? Not exactly, I said. Your mother had a separate arrangement. Some kind of trust. A decent amount set aside. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. So how much are we talking? He said, skipping straight past condolences. I mean, she must have left something for us. We're her kids. The word is scraped like sandpaper. I don't know the details yet, I said. There's a letter. A box. The manager said I should see a lawyer. Lawyer? He scoffed. You don't need to waste money on that. Mom talked to me about her Thursdays, you know. Said she was squirreling away, a little nest egg for the family. She always said she wanted us to benefit, not the taxman. I froze. She talked to you about it? Sure. He lied easily. Not the numbers, but the idea. Look, why don't I swing by tonight? We can go over everything. No need to overcomplicate it. Old habits wanted me to say yes. Instead, I heard Evelyn's voice from that porch. Promise me you won't sign anything without reading it. Even if it's from our own son. Not tonight. I'm tired. I'll read what she left first. There was a pause, then a flash of impatience. Dad, you're not getting any younger, he said. Maybe Mom left enough so we can all move on. You don't want to be rattling around in that house alone, do you? The line went cold. We'll talk later, I said, and ended the call before he could answer. That evening, the house felt emptier than it had the day after the funeral. I sat at the kitchen table with both envelopes in front of me. The one from the bank. The one I'd found in her handbag. They were identical right down to the curl of her E, as if she'd known I might misplace one or need a second chance. My hands shook a little as I slit the one from her bag. If you're reading this, the first line said, I couldn't tell you in person. I knew it would only worry you. That was so like her it hurt. She went on to explain, in neat, measured sentences, that there was money I didn't know about. That she'd taken side work doing books for small garages and shops that couldn't afford a full-time accountant. That when her sister Marianne died, there had been more in the will than she'd told anyone. Things that weren't safe in our joint names. She wrote, things your family might have tried to get it over your head. She called the trust. Protection. Protection from illness, from bad years at the garage, and, in one line that made my stomach drop, from anyone who might push you around about the house, the business, or your decisions. Especially not Mark. I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. My own son, singled out in ink that would outlast us all. What else did she keep from me? Who had been paying her, quietly, in cash and checks every Thursday? What exactly had Marianne left that was so dangerous? There were no answers in the letter, only more caution. Go to the bank yourself. She'd written. Ask for the manager. Do not let anyone else take you or speak for you, no matter how much they insist they're helping. You are not helpless, Frank. Don't let them treat you like you are. I folded the letter slowly, the paper soft from her hands and now mine. The first rush of betrayal pricked at me. That she'd trusted faceless clients and bank managers with a part of her life she'd never fully shown me. That she'd warned me against our own son without telling me why when she was alive. The doorbell rang just as I slid the letter back into its envelope. I checked the clock. It was nearly 9. Mark stood on the porch, shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes too bright. I figured we should talk sooner rather than later, he said, brushing past me into the hall without waiting to be invited. With Mom gone, we need to streamline things. House, garage. That old cabin, no point dragging it out. He talked fast, words tumbling over each other. Sell the cabin, maybe rent the house, maybe sell that too while prices were high. You could move into a condo, he said, or a nice assisted place. Less to worry about. And if Mom left a decent chunk, well, that gives all of us a fresh start, right? As he spoke, I felt the edges of Evelyn's letter pressing against my palm in my pocket like a reminder. Protection, she'd called it. From exactly this. I looked at my son, our son, and for the first time in my life, I saw not just his need, but the way he'd already started planning around what he thought was his. Not tonight, Mark, I said. We'll talk after I've opened your mother's box. His jaw tightened. You're making this harder than it has to be, Dad, he muttered. Maybe I was. But for the first time, I was starting to think that was the point. You're confused, Dad. The next time I went to the bank, they took me somewhere I'd never been before. Down a quiet hallway, past the offices and loan posters, to a heavy metal door with a keypad and a guard who looked like he didn't blink often. Right this way, Mr. Harris, the young clerk said, her voice dropping to that hushed tone people use in churches and hospital corridors. She checked my ID again, then my key, then nodded to the guard. The door buzzed, and we stepped into the safety deposit room. It was colder in there, or maybe that was just me. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls like a hive made of brushed steel. She led me to one halfway up, inserted her key, then mine, and slid the box out with surprising ease. I'll give you privacy, she murmured, setting it on the small table in the center. Take as much time as you need. Just press that button when you're finished. When she left, the room felt too quiet. I sat down, the chair scraping softly on the tile, and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was arranged with the same tidy care Evelyn used on her kitchen drawers. On top lay a stack of legal papers held together with a binder clip, a trust deed, updated wills, documents with seals and signatures. Underneath, manila envelopes labeled in her handwriting, house, cabin, garage, share certificates I didn't know we had. At the bottom, a small spiral-bound notebook, corners worn, and another envelope addressed to me. I opened the notebook first. Each page was dated, her neat script marching down the lines. Deposit from bookkeeping, Carter's Auto. Inheritance from Marianne, jewelry sale. Transferred X to trust to equal half of total assets. Numbers sat beside each note, forming a quiet history of money I'd never seen. The second letter trembled in my hands as I unfolded it. Frank. It began, if you're in this room, you've already read the first note and met Mr. Cole. I hope he was kind. I need to explain why I did things this way. After Aunt Ruth lost her house to her own son's gambling and Marianne's kids fought over her will, I realized love doesn't stop people from making bad choices when money's involved. I knew you would never push or trick me. I wasn't as sure about everyone else. So I put half of everything into the trust. House, cabin. Whatever extra I could scrape from side work and Marianne's estate. The other half stayed where you could see it, so you wouldn't feel like I was hiding the world from you. I didn't tell Mark about any of this on purpose. He has a good heart somewhere, but he makes reckless choices. I didn't trust his judgment with temptation in front of him. The trust says nothing major can be sold or borrowed against without your explicit consent, in front of an independent witness, in full understanding. This is to protect you if anyone ever tries to pressure you for your own good. You are not a child. Do not let anyone treat you like one. If you're angry I didn't share all this while I was alive, I understand. I just didn't want you carrying the same worries I did. Please forgive me if I judged wrong. Use this to keep yourself safe. By the time I reached the last line, my eyes were burning. Anger, gratitude, and grief tangled together until I couldn't tell which was which. She had trusted strangers, clients, bankers, lawyers, with parts of our life she'd kept from me, but she'd also spent 40 years building a wall between me and the worst version of our own son. I pressed the button. The clerk returned, expression politely blank, and slid the box back into its slot once I'd repacked it, documents stacked in my bag. On the drive home, the world outside the windshield looked slightly tilted. Trees, houses, the gas station on the corner where Mark used to buy candy with change from my pocket. Everything familiar, and yet nothing quite the same. Mark's car was parked in front of my house when I pulled up. Shiny, low to the ground. The kind of vehicle that costs more than it looks like it should. His wife Tara stood beside it, scrolling on her phone, boots too expensive for our cracked sidewalk. Finally, Mark said as I stepped out. We were about to come looking for you. I had an appointment. I answered, locking the car. At the bank. Yeah, we figured. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, the pressure just a little too firm. Well, that's why we're here. Thought we'd save you some trouble. Inside, they'd already made themselves at home. Papers lay spread on the dining table, my good pens uncapped beside them. Tara had set a pot of coffee on. The smell warm but somehow wrong. What's all this? I asked. Just paperwork to simplify things. Mark said, dropping into a chair and gesturing for me to sit opposite. Power of attorney. So I can handle the boring stuff like Mom did. A joint decision form about the properties. You don't need to worry about any of it, we've got it under control. He said we were all rowing the same boat. I thought your mother already handled the boring stuff, I said carefully. He waved that off. Dad, you're mixing things up. Mom told me all along she was saving for the family. She wanted me to lead once she was gone. This, he tapped the top page, is just making that official. I looked down. Durable power of attorney. It read at the top in letters big enough even my failing eyes could see. I just came from seeing the trust, I said. Your mother left instructions. Tara leaned forward, her expression arranged somewhere between sympathy and condescension. I'm sure she did, she said softly. She was so thorough. But you heard a lot of complex information today, and you're still grieving. It's easy to misunderstand. That's why we're here, to help you interpret it correctly. Is that so? I muttered. Of course, Mark said. We're not taking anything from you. We're helping. Mom's account, the trust, whatever. It was meant for all of us. For the family. You, me, Jen, the grandkids. But somebody has to be in charge. You don't want to spend your last years buried in forms, do you? His words landed heavier than he probably meant. Last years. As if my expiration date were stamped somewhere he could already see. You're too emotional right now to handle complex finances. Tara added, her voice dipped in honey. If you keep refusing help, people will say you can't manage on your own. And then it won't be us stepping in. It'll be the state. You don't want that. The humiliation flared hot in my chest. I'd fixed engines more complicated than any mortgage and run a business through recessions they'd only read about. Yet here I was, being spoken to like a child who couldn't be trusted with his own lunch money. Just sign here, Mark said, sliding the POA and a pen toward me. Let me take care of everything for you, like Mom did. We'll sell the cabin. Maybe downsize the house, get you into a nice place where you don't have to worry. We can invest the rest. Make it grow. I thought of Evelyn's notebook, each painstaking entry labeled, for protection. Not for growth. Not for Mark's next big idea. For protection. My fingers hovered over the pen. For a flicker of a moment, doubt wormed in. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe it would be easier to let him handle it. What if I did forget to pay a bill? What if a leak went unnoticed? Or a scammer called and I picked up? Then I heard her again. You are not a child. Do not let anyone treat you like one. I pulled my hand back. I think I should read these first, I said. Maybe have someone explain them to me. Mark's smile cracked. Dad, you're overcomplicating this, he snapped. We don't need outsiders poking around our business. I'm your son. You can trust me. I trusted your mother, and she trusted a lawyer enough to put her name in ink, I replied. Seems only fair I do the same. His jaw clenched. If you keep refusing, he said, voice hardening, we might have to get someone official to step in for your own safety. You're not thinking clearly. Everyone can see that. Everyone. Meaning him and Tara. Tara reached for my hand, patting it like you'd soothe a nervous dog. We'll love you, she crooned. We just want what's best. But there are processes, you know. Evaluations. Guardianships. Do you want strangers deciding where you live because you wouldn't let your own family help? They weren't hearing a grieving husband. They were speaking to a wallet with my name on it. For a heartbeat, fear clawed up my throat. I pictured some judge who'd never met me, some social worker reading a report Mark had colored, deciding I was no longer fit to choose where I slept. I saw my house packed up, my tools sold off. the cabin stripped of its memories. That vision steadied me more than any pep talk could. I forced my shoulders to slump, softened my voice. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe I am overwhelmed." The mark relaxed a fraction. Tara smiled victorious. "I'm going to sleep on it," I added, tapping the stack lightly. "My head's not right today. We can talk again after the weekend." Mark opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. "Fine," he said tightly. "But don't drag your feet, Dad. We can't leave everything hanging forever." When they finally left, tires squealing a little as he pulled away, the house fell quiet again. I gathered up the papers they'd left, reading each heading slowly. Durable power of attorney. Joint asset disposition agreement. Things that sounded helpful until you pictured whose pen was poised above your life. I carried them to the bedroom and opened the metal file cabinet Evelyn had always guarded so fiercely. In the back of the top drawer, under the trust deed, was a business card I didn't remember seeing before. Nina Morales, Estate and Trust Law, it read, with a number scrawled beneath in Evelyn's handwriting. I stood there a long moment, card in one hand, my son's threats echoing in my ears. Then I picked up the phone. I might be confused, I thought, but I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't about to walk into a trap my wife had spent 40 years building a way out of. Evelyn's lawyer Nina's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, the kind of place you walk past 100 times without really seeing. A brass plate by the door read, Morales and Finch Estate and Trust Law. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, clutching the folder with Evelyn's papers like a life jacket. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and photocopier ink. Diplomas lined the walls alongside framed photos of families on porches and boats. People who I assumed had done a better job than I had of knowing what their spouses were up to. A woman in her 50s with dark hair pulled into a low knot stepped out from behind the frosted glass door. No-nonsense suit, sensible shoes, sharp eyes that didn't miss much. "Mr. Harris?" she asked. "That's me," I said, standing a little too quickly. "I'm Nina Morales," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm, warm. "Come on back. I knew your wife. She spoke very highly of you." For some reason that stung more than if she'd said nothing at all. Her office was tidy but lived in stacks of files neatly arranged, a pot plant that had seen better days, a family photo on the credenza. She motioned me into a chair and waited until I sat before she spoke again. "I'm very sorry about Evelyn," she said. She was meticulous. Brave, too, in her way. She came to see me about 10 years ago and we've been updating things ever since. "I didn't know," I admitted, setting the folder down between us. "About any of it. The trust. The side work. Cole gave me this." I pushed Evelyn's notebook and the bank's copy of the trust deed across the desk. My son brought his own papers. I added the so-called family harmony agreement and the power of attorney Mark had tried to sell me on. Nina put on her glasses and began to read. For a while the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of pages and the occasional tap of her pen against the blotter. My heart thudded loud in my own ears. "Your wife didn't do anything halfway," she said finally, flipping back to the first page of the trust. "This is solid." "Very solid." "In English?" I asked. "In English," she said. "You're not crazy, and you're not unprotected." She held up the trust deed. "The trust holds a substantial sum. Decades of small deposits, some decent inheritances, and frankly, a lot of discipline. It also holds half of your primary residence, half of the cabin, and half of a small rental property you probably think of as that old duplex by the river." I blinked. "Half," I repeated. "Why half?" "Control and flexibility," she said. "Half in the trust, half in your personal name. The trust half can't be sold, mortgaged, or pledged without your explicit, personal, notarized consent, given in front of me or another trustee, with a recorded statement that you understand what you're doing. That's what your wife insisted on. The other half lets you still feel like you have some freedom to make smaller decisions without wading through legal hoops." I sat back, absorbing that. "And Mark?" I asked. "Where does he fit into this?" She tapped another section, a paragraph buried in the middle. "He doesn't," she said simply. "Your wife was cautious. She didn't trust anyone with this house. Not even you, frankly." She gave me an apologetic half-smile. The trust explicitly excludes Mark from acting as your agent in property matters. He cannot sign for you on anything the trust touches, no matter what he waves under your nose. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Some of the weight that had been pressing on my chest since the funeral shifted, just a fraction. She knew our boy could do this. I asked quietly. She didn't know what he would do, Nina said. None of us do. But she knew what he could do. She told me she'd paid off a couple of his debts years back. Credit cards, a bad investment. He promised he'd learned his lesson. She watched him repeat the pattern. She was terrified that when she was gone, he'd turn to you. That you'd sign whatever made his life easier and call it love. I swallowed hard. Images came unbidden. Mark at 16, sulking because we wouldn't co-sign for a motorcycle. Mark at 25, charming us with big plans and spreadsheets he barely understood. Mark at 42, leaning across my dining table telling me I was too emotional to handle my own affairs. And those papers he brought? I asked, nodding at the power of attorney and the joint agreement. She flipped through them, lips thinning. Sloppy, she said. And dangerous if you had signed. This power of attorney tries to give him wide authority with no real safeguards. The joint decision form would have been a mess in court, but it would have been enough for him to bully third parties. None of it meets the standard your wife built into the trust. So when he said Mom wanted him to Liga, I began. He was rewriting history. She finished. Your wife was very clear in her notes. She wanted the money and property to protect you first. Anything left over, sure, the kids could benefit. But not by steamrolling you out of your own life. I felt something inside me unclench. For days I'd been caught between feeling like a fool and feeling like a traitor for doubting my son. Hearing Evelyn's decisions laid out by someone who had actually listened to her while she was alive. It was like having her in the room again, one step ahead of me as usual. What happens if he keeps pushing? I asked. He threatened to get someone official involved if I didn't sign. Nina's eyes chilled a degree. If he keeps pushing, she said. He edges into elder financial exploitation territory. There are laws about this, Mr. Harris. Adults have the right to make unwise choices, but they also have the right not to be coerced or lied to. Between the trust, your wife's notes, and whatever the bank has logged, we have a strong foundation. I rubbed my forehead. So what do? I asked. I don't want to drag my own son into court if I can help it. But I also don't want to wake up one day and find my house sold out from under me. First, we make sure no one can do anything behind your back, she said briskly. I'll file notices with the property registry and the bank that the trust interest exists and is being enforced. That will freeze any attempt to sell or borrow against those assets without your consent. I nodded. Second, she continued, we get you a clean bill of mental health from a neutral geriatric specialist. Not because I doubt you, but because Mark's next move will almost certainly involve calling you confused or incapable. If we walk into any future confrontation with a recent evaluation saying you're competent, it undercuts that angle completely. I grimaced but understood. And third, we let him talk, she said. If he and Tara keep coming around with simplify things papers, we consider a recorded conversation. You act a little unsure, ask them to explain their plans. If they admit they know you don't really understand, but want you to sign anyway, or they talk openly about getting your house, that's powerful evidence if we need it. Think of it as springing the trap your wife built. I stared at her. You want me to pretend to be more confused than I am? I asked. I want you to survive this with your dignity and your roof intact, she replied. Sometimes that means letting people show you who they really are. On tape. The thought of baiting my own son made my stomach twist. But the memory of his hand shoving those papers toward me, of Tara's soft voice threatening guardianship, twisted it more. I'm an old mechanic, Ms. Morales, I said slowly. I'm not a spy. You're also a husband, she countered gently. Your wife spent 40 years walking to that bank to build this net. She trusted that when the time came, you'd use it. You won't be alone. I'll be here. The law will be here. You just have to decide whether you want to let this slide quietly or face it head on. I looked down at Evelyn's notebook on the desk, at the careful rows of figures and the little notes in the margins. Protection. Rainy day, for Frank. Relief and sorrow washed through me in equal measure, but underneath them, something harder settled. Resolve. All right, I said. File whatever you need to file. I'll see that doctor, and if Mark comes back with more papers. I took a breath. Then we'll let him talk. Nina nodded, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. Good, she said. Your wife prepared the ground. Now we decide what grows on it. As I left her office, the world outside looked a shade less threatening. The fear was still there, but it had edges now. Borders drawn by documents and a woman who'd loved me enough to plan for a future she wouldn't see. I slipped Nina's card into my wallet beside Evelyn's letter. If Mark thought I was confused, maybe that was fine. For now. He didn't need to know that, thanks to his mother, I finally had a map. Let them talk. 2 days after my visit to Nina's office, Jenny drove down with a trunk full of groceries I hadn't asked for, and a worried crease between her eyebrows. You look tired, she said as she unloaded bags onto my counter. I am tired, I replied, but not just from missing sleep. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Evelyn used to tally our bills, and I told her everything. The trust, the notebook, the way Mark had turned my dining room into his personal boardroom with those papers. Nina's plan. Jenny listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold by the time I finished. So Mom really did all that? She said softly. Trusts, side work, the cabin in there. I knew she was organized. But she was more than organized, I said. She was scared. For us. For me mostly. Jenny's eyes shone. She asked me once a few years ago what I thought about guardianships and POAs. She admitted. I thought she was just being hypothetical. I told her I'd never let anyone shove you somewhere you didn't choose. I didn't realize she was already making plans. I exhaled slowly. I should have listened harder, I said. To both of you. She reached across and squeezed my hand. You're listening now, she said. That's what matters. Later, in Nina's office again. The three of us sat around her desk like conspirators in a movie, except there was nothing glamorous about it. Just a tired old man, his steady daughter, and a lawyer with a stack of files thick enough to choke a shredder. Here's where we are, Nina said, tapping the trust with her pen. Everything important is locked behind this. Mark can't touch it without you and me both present and a recorder running. He doesn't know that. He thinks a signature at your dining table is enough. That ignorance is either going to fade away or incriminate him. Our job is to see which happens. Jenny frowned. You're sure we can record him? She asked. I don't want to do anything shady. In this state, one-party consent is legal, Nina said. That means as long as your father agrees to record his own conversation in his own home, we're fine. We're not bugging him secretly, he'll know. Mark and Tara will be informed in writing afterwards if we use it. The question isn't can we. It's can he stomach it. She looked at me. I don't like it, I admitted. Feels like I'm sticking a microphone in my own kid's mouth, waiting for him to choke. You can walk away now and let them take what they can, Nina said, not unkindly. Or you can let them say out loud what they've only implied. Once they put it into words, it's not just suspicion. It's evidence. Jenny nodded. Dad, if he was just confused or grieving, this would feel different, she said. But showing up with those forms, threatening guardianship, that's not confusion. That's a plan. I thought of Mark at 8, proudly holding up a crook birdhouse we'd built together, sawdust in his hair. Then I pictured him at my table, sliding the POA toward me like a contract in some cheap drama, telling me I might need someone, official, to take over. She spent 40 years walking to that bank to build this safety net. I said quietly, more to myself than to them. The least I can do is stand on it. Nina gave a small, satisfied smile. Then here's the plan, she said. She laid it out in simple steps, like a repair manual aimed at my worn-out nerves. Step 1. She would draft a perfectly innocuous-sounding invitation for a family financial meeting at my house. The pretense would be going through Mom's paperwork to see what's fair, giving Mark and Tara exactly what they claimed to want a seat at the table. Step 2 before that meeting. She'd come by with a technician to set up a discreet recording device in the dining room. Nothing like the gadgets in spy movies. Just a small box hidden in a decorative piece, wired legally with my consent. She'd also show me how to use a recording app on my phone, just in case. Step 3. The elder abuse officer she'd already spoken to, Detective Harris, would be on standby. He wouldn't hide in the bushes or burst out of closets. He'd simply be waiting to review anything we captured, ready to step in if Mark's behavior crossed any more lines. My role sounded simple when she described it, but it knotted my stomach. You just need to be yourself, she said. Or rather, the version of yourself Mark thinks you are right now. Tired, a little muddled, grateful for help. So an exaggerated version of every old man stereotype he's already using against me, I said dryly. Exactly, she said. Ask him to remind you what the papers are. Say things like, you told me I didn't need to read it, right? Or, you promised I'd still have a place to live, didn't you? Let him talk. Let Tara reassure you. The more they explain, the clearer their intent gets. And if he doesn't say anything incriminating, I asked. Then we have the trust and this lovely POA draft he left you, she replied. We'll still block anything he tries to do and keep you safe. But based on what you've already told me, I doubt he'll be able to resist bragging a little once he thinks you're back in line. It felt wrong, planning for my son's arrogance the way I used to plan around a customer's tight budget. But it also felt necessary. What if he realizes? Jenny asked. What if he sees the recorder or senses something's off? Then we stop. Nina said. We don't force it. This isn't about tricking an innocent man. It's about giving an opportunistic one enough rope to show his intentions. If he backs off and behaves, that's a win too. On the drive home, Jenny insisted on following me in her car, as if she didn't quite trust mine, or me, to make it back alone. We parked in the driveway and sat in my kitchen again, the afternoon light slanting in familiar lines across the table. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked. Once we go down this road, it's hard to come back to pretending everything's fine. Everything hasn't been fine for a while, I said. I was just the last one to admit it. She reached over and squeezed my shoulder. I'll be here that night, she said. I'll drop by with a casserole so I can hear some of it in person. It'll look normal. I was grateful, though I didn't say it out loud. Pride is a stupid thing, but it's stubborn company. 2 days later, Nina arrived with a slim man in a polo shirt carrying a small tool bag. He introduced himself as her IT magician, then set about his work with efficient discretion. He mounted a harmless-looking digital clock on the wall opposite the dining table. Audio only, he explained when he saw my raised eyebrow. No cameras. Less invasive, still effective. He showed me the tiny switch on the side, the indicator light that would blink once when it started, once when it stopped. It will record everything in this room until you turn it off or it runs out of storage, he said. It won't pick up whispers in the next street. Just normal conversation around the table. Nina handed me my phone. And this, she said, is your backup. Big red button, start and stop. Keep it on the table, screen down. If they notice, say Jenny set it up so you don't miss her calls. The simplicity of it made my throat tighten. All this fuss just to make sure I could keep living in the house my own hands had helped repair 100 times. That evening, after they left, the dining room looked exactly as it always had. Same table, same mismatched chairs, same faded runner Jenny had brought back from college. Only I knew the clock on the wall now did more than tell time. The invitation went out the next morning. A neutral email Nina helped me type, sent from my account. Mark, Tara, it read. I'd like to have you over for dinner on Saturday to go through Mom's paperwork together, see what she wanted, and talk about the future. I know she meant for us to handle this as a family. Love, Dad. Mark replied within 10 minutes. Finally, his message said, we'll be there at 6. Don't worry about cooking, we'll bring takeout. Saturday crept closer like a storm you can see on the horizon. I busied myself with pointless tasks. Oiling door hinges that didn't squeak, straightening pictures that weren't crooked. Jenny came by that afternoon, pretending to help but mostly just keeping me from thinking too hard. You don't have to be perfect tonight. she reminded me as she set plates on the table. You just have to be yourself and let him be himself. And my hands shook a little as I checked the clock one more time, fingers brushing the tiny switch. The indicator blinked once, then settled into stillness. At 5:58, Mark's engine growled up the street. Headlights swept across the window. Tara's laugh floated ahead of them. Showtime, Jenny murmured under her breath. I took my seat at the head of the table, the recording device humming silently above us, Evelyn's notebook tucked safely back in the file cabinet, and my heart beating an uneven rhythm in my ears. When the doorbell rang, I forced my shoulders to sag, my smile to waver just enough, and called out, "Come in, kids." If they thought they were walking into an easy victory, I wasn't about to correct them, not yet. Recorded over dinner. The first thing I did when they came through the door was offer them food. That's what you do in this house, you put something on the table. Even when what's sitting in your chest feels too heavy to eat. Smells good, Tara said as she walked into the dining room, carrying a paper bag of takeout like a peace offering. Mark followed with plastic containers stacked in his arms, eyes already roaming the room. Thanks for coming, I said. Thought it'd be better to talk about all this together. The clock on the wall ticked above us, its nuanards silently humming. I'd flipped the tiny switch 15 minutes earlier. One blink, then nothing. I had to trust it was listening while I pretended not to. We settled around the table. Jenny had dropped by an hour before with a casserole and then conveniently remembered she'd promised to FaceTime her kids at bedtime. Now she was in the living room, close enough to hear if voices got raised. Not so close as to spook anyone. We filled plates. Chicken, potatoes, green beans. The food tasted like cardboard to me, but I chewed anyway, letting the clink of cutlery and small talk lay a thin cloth over the tension. I still can't believe she's gone, Tara said at one point, shaking her head. Your mom was always the strong one. Yeah, Mark muttered around a mouthful. Strong-willed, more like. I dabbed my lips with a napkin, playing my part. Your mother always said you'd help me with the hard stuff, Mark, I said, letting a tremor slip into my voice. Said you'd step up when she couldn't. His head came up just a little. There's a certain way a man looks when you hand him exactly the compliment he's been feeding himself in private. She was right, he said. That's what we're trying to do. I nodded slowly. I appreciate it, I said. At my age, well, some things are harder to follow than they used to be. That seemed to loosen something in him. He set his fork down and leaned back, wiping his hands on a napkin like he was done with the appetizer and ready for the main course. Look, Dad, he began. We all know things can't stay the same forever. This house is too big for you. The cabin's a mile of trouble from town. And now we know Mom had that account, the trust, whatever it gives us options. Options, Tara echoed, smiling brightly. Good word. What sort of options? I asked, letting my brow furrow. I know your mother put things aside for protection, she said. Didn't she say something about the trust being for emergencies? Mark waved a hand. She used trust like people use nest egg, he said smoothly. It wasn't some complicated legal thing. She just meant savings. And this, he tapped an imaginary column in the air, this situation. This is an emergency. You in a 4-bedroom house with stairs, that cabin rotting by the lake, you alone managing all of it. That's not safe. So what do you propose? I asked. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. We sell this place while the market's good. We sell the cabin. We take the proceeds plus Mom's account, and we do 3 things. 1, pay off the little bits of debt you've got, tie up loose ends. 2, put you in a nice apartment or an assisted place where you've got people around and no repairs to worry about. 3, invest what's left into something that actually grows, like my business. Make that money work instead of letting it sit there while you know. He trailed off, shrugging. While I what? I asked quietly. He avoided my eyes. You're what, 72? 73, he said. You've got maybe 10 good years left before you really slow down. It'd be stupid to let you sit on all that when it could be setting all of us up. There it was, not even dressed up in nicer clothes. Stupid. Tara jumped in, smoothing the edges. We just want some control before you forget even more, she said, her tone pitched to sound caring. You already admitted you didn't really understand what the bank manager said. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Things are complicated now. Online this account that. Let us handle the stress. I let my gaze drop to my plate as if in concession. Inside, something else entirely tightened. Up above, the clock's dark little eye watched. What about Jenny? I asked after a beat. Does she get a say? Tara's smile cooled a degree. We need to do this before Jenny gets involved, she said. She'll just complicate things. You know how emotional she gets. She'll want to hold on to everything because of memories and sentiment. We're trying to be practical here. She'll have her share, Mark added quickly. Of course. But someone has to make the tough calls. That's on me now. It wasn't just the hunger in his voice. It was the way he said us. I was not part of that word. I let a little shake into my hand as I reached for my water glass. I'm just trying to remember what your mother said, I murmured. Didn't she write something about not letting anyone push me around? About the trust being for my protection first? Dad, Mark said, exasperation bleeding through. You're confused. Mom told me all along she was saving for the family. She wanted me to lead. She knew you hated dealing with paperwork, so she set things up so you wouldn't have to. You don't need to worry about the trust, the account, whatever. That's my job now. You just sign where I mark, like you did after Mom died. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Like I did after Mom died. I repeated, playing dumb. What did I sign then? You know, the hospital stuff, the insurance forms, the bank things, he said quickly. All the boring bits. You said, just tell me where to sign. Remember? I remembered. I also remembered Evelyn's note telling me exactly why she'd created a hoop he couldn't jump through without Nina there. Tara reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a neat stack of papers in a folder. She fanned them like a dealer about to start a game. We drew up something more polished than last time, she said. A new power of attorney, some asset transfer forms. This way everything's clear. No surprises. By the time you realize how much easier life is without all these decisions, the money will already be working for us. Working for us? Mark repeated, nodding. We'll visit. We'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll still be Dad. You just won't have to worry about any of this. Any of this. My life, carved up into line items. They talked about me then as if I'd already moved out of the house, as if I were a problem to be solved, a liability to be managed. Where to put me so I wouldn't be lonely. Which facility had the best staff. How much they'd budget for my room versus what they could reinvest. I sat there, hands folded, the picture of an old man worn down by grief, while inside a colder, steadier part of me counted every word like gears clicking into place. Eventually Mark slid the folder across the table. Here, he said. This is the straightforward version. No need to read it all now, we can walk through it together as you sign. It's just making official what we've already agreed tonight. Had we? I hadn't agreed to a damn thing. But that was the story he was already telling himself. I picked up the top page and let my eyes wander over the dense paragraphs. Letters swam, not from age this time, but from anger. I don't know, I said, letting my voice wobble. It's a lot of words, he huffed. He doesn't read any of this. He told Tara, not bothering to lower his voice. Never has. Mom handled it for him. Now it's my turn. That's why we're here, she cooed. To make it easier. Just sign and we'll take care of everything. I set the paper down carefully. I think. I began, then let the sentence trail off as if I'd lost my thought. I think I need to sleep on it. My head's pounding. Too much to take in all at once. Mark's jaw tightened. Dad. We just spent an hour going over this, he said. What's there to think about? Every day we wait, the market shifts, the trust sits there doing nothing. I know. I cut in softly. But your mother always said not to make big decisions when you're tired. Let me read these tomorrow when my brain's fresher. Then we can talk again. Silence stretched. He drummed his fingers on the table, eyes flicking to the clock, which ticked on unbothered. Fine, he said at last, shoving his chair back. But don't drag this out, Dad. We're trying to help you before things get messy. Tara gathered the papers, only half masking her annoyance. We'll leave the copies, she said, dropping the folder on the table. Just sign where Mark flagged. We'll pick them up in a couple of days. At the door, Mark turned back. For a second, something like doubt crossed his face. Then it hardened into impatience. Call if you get confused, he said. We'll explain it again. When the door closed behind them, the house exhaled. I walked back to the dining room on unsteady legs. The folder sat where Tara had left it, neon tabs like little tongues mocking me from the margins. Above it, the clock's tiny light blinked once as I flipped the switch off. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Nina. How did it go? I pressed the button and waited while the audio file saved, its progress bar crawling across the screen. Then I attached it to a message, added a photo of the signed nowhere documents, and hit send. A minute later, her reply came in. This is more than enough. Are you ready for what comes next? I looked around the room, the scuffed table, the chair where Evelyn used to sit, the faint outline on the wall where a picture had hung for years. For the first time since this all started, I felt something like grim, fragile hope. Yes, I typed back. For once, I think I am. The terms they didn't read. Nina's office looked different with all four of us in it. Smaller somehow, the air thicker. She'd arranged the chairs in a neat semicircle around her desk, me in the middle. Mark and Tara to my right, an empty chair to my left. The blinds were half drawn, letting in just enough light to make the dust dance. Thanks for coming, Nina said, professional and pleasant. I know it's been a difficult few weeks. My hope is that after today, everyone has a clearer sense of where things stand, and we can avoid any more misunderstandings. Mark smirked. That's all I've been asking for, he said. He wore his good suit, the one he reserved for weddings and loan applications. Tara sat rigid beside him, hands folded over a leather folder, her smile stretched too tight. I sat hunched a little in my chair, letting my shoulders slump, my hands rest limp on my knees. Old, tired, manageable. I'd practiced the look in the mirror that morning and hated myself for it. Nina slid a single sheet of paper onto the desk, facing them. Before we begin, she said, I've prepared a short acknowledgement form. It just summarizes what's already happened so there's no confusion later. Standard practice when emotions run high. Mark barely glanced at it before reaching for the pen. Whatever gets us to the signature stage faster, he said. Tara leaned over, eyes flicking down the page, then up again. You don't need us to read all this legalese, do you? She asked, half joking. You're welcome to, Nina said evenly. But it's quite straightforward. They didn't read it. Mark scribbled his name with the same careless flourish I'd seen on every bounced check he'd ever written. Tara followed suit, her signature neat but quick. When Nina slid a copy to me, I traced the printed lines with my eyes, even though I already knew what they said. Then I signed. Good, Nina said, collecting the papers and slipping them into a folder. Now that we're all in agreement on the facts, let's talk about how to move forward with Mrs. Harris's plan. She wanted the family taken care of. Mark jumped in. That's all we've been trying to do. Dad even texted he was ready to finalize things. I let my gaze drop as if embarrassed. I don't want any more fights, I said quietly. If this is what your mother wanted, I'll sign. His chest puffed up a little. For a heartbeat, I almost saw the boy who used to light up when I told him he'd done a job well. Then Nina opened her folder. Before we discuss implementation, she said, I want to make sure we're all hearing the same story. I'll read aloud the key points you've just acknowledged. The mark shifted, annoyance flashing. Is that really necessary? It's my license on the line, she said with a small smile. Indulge me. She read, voice clear. We, Mark Harris and Tara Harris, acknowledge that in the days following the death of Evelyn Harris, we presented legal documents to Frank Harris, without ensuring he had independent legal counsel and without fully explaining their scope, during a period of acute grief. Tara's fingernails dug into the leather of her folder. Wet, she said. That's not. We further acknowledge, Nina continued, not missing a beat, that we characterized these documents as routine and minimizing in nature, despite their effect of granting us broad control over Mr. Harris's assets. Mark sat up straighter. Hang on, he said. That's not how. Nina lifted her eyes from the page, looking directly at them. You read this before signing, I assume, she asked mildly. Mark's mouth opened, then closed. She went back to the paper. We confirmed that we discussed using the majority of Mrs. Harris's savings, trust funds, and property sale proceeds primarily to pay our own debts and invest in ventures controlled by us, and that we proposed moving Mr. Harris into a smaller rental or assisted facility with limited input from him. Heat rushed up my neck. Hearing it stripped of the justifications they'd wrapped it in over dinner made it sound even uglier. "Stop," Tara said. "You're twisting." We acknowledged that we were aware of the existence of the Callahan Family Trust. She glanced at me, correcting herself. "Sorry, the Harris Family Trust. And that we knew or should have known we had no authority to act as agents for that trust or dispose of its assets without Mr. Harris's explicit, independently witnessed consent, as required by the trust instrument." Mark's face went pale. Nina laid the page flat on the desk. "That," she said calmly, "is what you agreed you did. In writing. Today, with no one holding a gun to your head, you both just signed a statement explaining exactly how you manipulated a grieving elder. That's not a misunderstanding. That's evidence. This is trickery." Mark exploded, jumping to his feet. "You set us up. You can't just hide things in forms. Dad, you saw that. Tell her you didn't mean." "Sit down, Mr. Harris," another voice said from the doorway. We all turned. Detective Harris stepped into the room, badge clipped to his belt, a plain folder in his hand. Behind him stood a woman from Adult Protective Services, tablet tucked under one arm. "What is this?" Tara whispered. "This," Nina said, folding her hands, "is the part where family business becomes criminal procedure." A Mark rounded on me. "You brought cops into this," he shouted. "Your own son." I met his gaze, feeling something in me steady even as my heart cracked. "I brought protection into this," I said. "Like your mother asked me to." Detective Harris nodded to Nina, then to me. "Mr. Harris," he said, "thank you for coming today. We've reviewed the recordings you provided from your dinner last week, along with the documents your son left at your home and the history of the trust. Combined with this new acknowledgement they've just signed, we have a fairly complete picture." "Recordings," Tara echoed, voice climbing. "You were spying on us, in his own house, during a conversation about his finances," the APS worker said. "That's not spying. That's documenting." Mark whirled back to Nina. "You represent all of us," he said. "You're our family lawyer. You can't do this." "No," she said evenly. "I represent your father. Your mother hired me to protect him. I never represented you. I advised you, in fact, in my initial email to seek your own counsel. You chose not to." Harris opened his folder and pulled out a printed transcript. "On the recording," he said, "we hear you say, Mr. Harris, and I quote, 'He doesn't read any of this. He never has. Mom handled it for him. Now it's my turn.' And Mrs. Harris, we hear you say, 'By the time he realizes anything, the money will already be working for us.'" The room went very still. "Taken together with the trust," Harris went on, "and this signed acknowledgement that you minimized the nature of the documents while your father was grieving, we have reasonable grounds to find attempted elder financial exploitation. The district attorney is reviewing whether to file criminal charges. At minimum, Adult Protective Services will be recommending a protective order and restrictions on your ability to act in any fiduciary role for Mr. Harris." Tara's composure cracked. "It was his idea," she blurted, pointing at Mark. "He said your dad owed him. I just went along. I told him it was going too far." "You love the idea of the money working for us," Mark snapped back. "All your credit cards? Who do you think was going to bail?" "Enough," Harris said sharply. "This isn't the place for you two to hash out your marriage." He turned to me. "Mr. Harris, you are under no obligation to speak right now. But if there's anything you want to add for the record." I shook my head slowly. "I think the papers and those tapes say more than I could," I answered. "For 40 years I believed my son when he said he just needed one more chance. This time, I believed my wife and the law instead." Mark's eyes shone with something that might have been hurt if it hadn't been caked over with anger. "Dad, you believe them over your own son?" he demanded. "No, son," I said quietly. "I believed you for 40 years. This time I believed your mother and the law." Silence settled, heavy and final. In the weeks that followed, there were more meetings, more signatures. The DA, in the end, decided not to pursue jail time. First offense, family context, no money actually lost. But the record would show a formal finding of attempted elder financial exploitation. A protective order kept Mark and Tara from handling any of my affairs. The court revoked any lingering powers of attorney, barred them from applying for new ones without oversight. They were ordered to repay the modest sums they'd already siphoned out of joint accounts under the guise of helping, plus a fine that stung more than they let on. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, summed it up in a voice that echoed off the wooden walls. "Your father is not an asset to be managed," she told them. "He is the reason you ever had a roof to scheme over. You are fortunate he chose a path today that doesn't end with you in custody." I walked out of that courthouse with papers in my hand that said, in dry legal language, that my house, my cabin, and the trust Evelyn built were safe behind walls my son could no longer breach. My dignity, bruised though it was officially my own again. But I didn't walk out with my son. The bank by the sea, by the time the investigation wrapped up, summer had crept in almost without my noticing. The letter from Adult Protective Services came on a Monday, cream paper with an official seal. "Case closed," it said in dry language, "with protective measures in place." It didn't mention the way my hands stopped shaking quite so often after that, or how I slept a little easier knowing there wasn't a stranger somewhere signing my name. Mark and Tara kept their distance. For a while there were angry texts, paragraphs about family betrayal, and airing dirty laundry. I read the first few, then started letting them pile up unopened. Some nights I'd sit in my armchair with the phone buzzing on the side table, the screen lighting up with my son's name, and feel an ache so deep it almost folded me in half. Then I'd look at the trust papers in the file cabinet and remember exactly what he'd tried to do with that name. Jenny drove down more often. She'd show up with a bag of groceries or a new plant for the front step and a story about the grandkids. We'd talk about Mom, about the way she burned the first Thanksgiving turkey, about the time she fixed a school's entire bookkeeping system with a pencil and a ledger when their computers crashed. Sometimes Jenny would catch me looking at Evelyn's empty chair and just slide her hand over mine without saying anything. One Thursday, a few months after the court date, I woke up with a stubborn feeling in my chest I couldn't quite name. Habit, maybe, or something deeper. Either way, I put on a clean shirt, combed my hair, and drove to Maple Street Bank. The lobby looked the same as it had the first time I dropped Evelyn off there decades ago. Same polished floor, same teller windows, even the same potted plant in the corner that somehow refused to die. A few heads turned when I walked in, more out of curiosity than recognition. At the counter, a young teller smiled. Before I could say anything, Mr. Cole appeared from his office, as if he'd been expecting me. "Monsieur Harris," he said, extending a hand. "Good to see you." "You too," I replied. "I just wanted to check on things, and maybe understand a bit more about what my wife actually did here all those years." His expression softened. "Of course," he said. "Come sit down for a moment." Though we settled in his office again. No ominous files this time, just his computer and a framed photo of his own family on the desk. "Your wife used to come in every Thursday at 10, he said. "I mean that literally. 10 o'clock on the dot. She'd have her notebook, her passbook, and a list of questions. She'd check the trust balances, pay a little extra on your mortgage when she could, and ask about interest rates and protections. Always protections. What happens if my husband gets sick? What happens if my son makes a bad decision?" She was very focused. I pictured her walking through those doors week after week, rain on her coat or sun on her shoulders, carrying worries she'd never voiced aloud at our kitchen table. "She never did it out of shame?" I asked. "Keeping secrets from me, I mean." He shook his head. "From what I saw, Mr. Harris, she did it out of love and fear in equal measure. Love for you. Fear of circumstances, and yes, of what might happen if certain people had too much access. She always said her husband worked with his hands, so she'd work with the numbers so he could rest someday." That settled something in me I hadn't realized was still floating. The Thursdays had never been about hiding a life from me. They'd been about building one for when I stumbled. On the way home, instead of turning right toward the house, I went left, out toward the highway. The drive to the cabin took 40 minutes if the traffic lights were kind. That day they all seemed to turn green just as I approached. The cabin sat at the edge of a small lake, weathered and stubborn, much like the man climbing its front steps. We'd bought it cheap in the '80s, when lakefront meant mosquitoes and leaky roofs instead of vacation rentals. Evelyn had fallen in love with the crooked dock and the way the fog clung to the water in the mornings. Inside, dust motes danced in a shaft of light from the small window over the sink. The mismatched furniture was exactly as we'd left it last summer. A mug still sat on the shelf with a lipstick print faintly visible on the rim. I walked through each room, letting my hand trail along the walls we'd painted ourselves, once in a cheerful yellow that had faded into something gentler. Out on the dock, the boards creaked under my weight, but held. "You were right," I said aloud, staring at the ripples spreading from the post I'd just leaned on. "You were right not to trust our son with temptation. And you were right to trust me enough, in the end, to use what you built. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." The lake didn't answer, of course, but a breeze picked up, ruffling what little hair I had left. And for a moment I could almost feel her beside me, arms folded, eyes scanning the shoreline for loose planks. Back in town, Nina and I sat down one last time to tidy the future. "We should update your will," she said. "Not because of Mark exactly, but because everything around him has changed." We kept it simple. The main assets stayed in the trust. Jenny would be primary beneficiary, and later trustee, on the condition that she sat down with a financial counselor before making any big decisions. The cabin would either go to her kids, if they wanted it, or to a small nonprofit Evelyn had once supported that ran grief retreats by the water. As for Mark, I left him a small, symbolic sum. Enough that no one could say I'd cut him out in anger, not enough to be a prize. Sometimes the message is in the proportions. Nina said when I signed. "This says, I did not forget you. I just chose not to reward what you tried to do." At home that night, the house felt quieter, but not empty. Paperwork, trusts, lawyers. Once upon a time I'd have called all of it unromantic. Now I saw it for what it was: armor my wife had strapped onto me one Thursday at a time. I still missed my son. I missed the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat on the way back from the lake, hair smelling of campfire. I grieved that somewhere along the way, the man he became had started seeing me less as a father and more as an obstacle between him and a pile of numbers. But I'd stopped calling my own survival a betrayal. Protecting yourself from someone's worst choices doesn't mean you never love their better ones. These days, on Thursday mornings, I sometimes sit on the bench across from the bank with a cup of coffee and watch people go in and out. Young parents with strollers, older couples arguing softly over statements, kids depositing their first paychecks. At 10 o'clock, the doors open and close, just like they did when Evelyn walked through them every week. I don't go in as much anymore. There's no need, the systems she put in place hum along with Nina's watchful eye. But I like being there, in that spot, at that time. It feels like standing in the echo of her footsteps. If you've listened this far, maybe you see something of your own life in mine. Greed can make even your own blood see you as an obstacle instead of a parent. Being older doesn't mean surrendering your rights or your mind. Love isn't just flowers and anniversaries. It's also planning for the day you're not here, even if that means protecting your partner from your own children. And all that dry paperwork we ignore. Sometimes it's the only shield we have. So I'll ask you, do you think blood alone makes someone family, or is it how they treat you when money is involved? If your own child tried to control your home and savings the way Mark tried with mine, would you press charges? Or would you walk away and hope they changed? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. If you've ever had a relative try to control your money or your home, share your story below. Someone out there might need to hear it. And if you like long, true-to-life stories where elders fight back and justice is finally served, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from.